Wheel of Time episode 4. I've got a playlist to the other 3 down in the description below, so if you're interested in those, start there. But now, episode 4 for me was a real letdown. It started incredibly strong and finishes really strong, but in the middle, it's just a load of fluff. It really felt like a filler episode that was done to save money because they'd spent it at the beginning and at the end. On top of that, apart from a few different bits of exposition about what the Ajars are like, I don't think it really added much. It treats one of the characters like crap. It makes Moraine look like a complete moron and entirely and utterly restructures the entire magic system, which it seems to be a pretty important thing to just do on the off chance in a filler episode without even kind of talking about it. But that is indeed what they've done, and it starts by going back to the first episode. One of the Redajar actually comments that this power is only for women. You shouldn't touch it. When a man touches it, he makes it filthy. And it's never really made sense because there's actually 2 powers in the one power. They work against and with each other, and the men touch one and the women touch the one. Now, the darkness, the taint on the men's side, is like an oil slick. When you reach through the oil slick into the pure water, the water remains pure. It's just that now you're tainted. You're covered in the filth. So the power itself never gets tainted in any way, and it doesn't affect the women because they use an entirely different power. But just the visuals alone in this make it sound like her description in the first episode is what they're going with. They're going with that men and women draw from the same pool, and it's pure up until it touches the man. But as proof, I give you this. When he draws on the one power itself, you can see the white weaves. It's the same colour as what Saidar is, and I was expecting some kind of visual change to it, that this was a different power. You can't see that this is Saidin rather than Saidar, and I really genuinely think that they think that the one power is one power. But you can see when he starts to channel it, the white starts to get coated in the blackness, which is the taint. I do think this is a great visual for what it is. I just don't think that the idea that it only gets tainted when he starts to channel it is very good or accurate at all, and does completely start changing the magic system. And that gets worse later on. But for now, just from a purely visual perspective and a graphics perspective, I think it's very well done. And it seems to be a common point that I say about the show, that the graphics are good, the graphics designers are good, and the visuals are great. It's just the writing that lets it down. And what we see here is the weaves wrapping around him. Again, they've done a great job on it. And it only actually advances to a peak where at the start, you actually see this. And I wasn't expecting this, but I think it looks really good. As he's talking to the man, you see this sort of visual representation of the taint talking to him. They go over his shoulders and start giving advice, and it's sort of, he's hearing whispers, hearing voices. It's a very common thing for insane people to do, but in this, it's actually made up of the taint itself, of the power itself, and I think it looks really cool. It may not come across so much when it's freeze-framed, but when it's actually all moving around, it looks almost alive, and I think it's a great effect, and a good way of showing somebody actually hearing voices in a visual medium rather than just it being described. But unfortunately, after that scene, it's all downhill from here. You see, Moraine has been injured for the last few episodes from episode 1, and it's really impacted on the show, the story, and it's something that never happened in canon and shouldn't have been here. So finally, she's getting healed. Finally, she can get back to the actual plot of the books, if she wants to. You have to remember, at this point, she's left all of the people out in the wild. These are untrained farmers from a little village who are naive and have no idea about the world. They didn't show things like land teaching them how to sword fight, and they are completely and utterly unguarded and unknowledgeable, with literal Satan after them and all of his resources and every dark friend across the entire world. You'd think that Moraine would want to help them. She would go out and protect them from this evil, because if they die, the world dies. The apocalypse happens. It's a pretty major event. So obviously, when she's healed, she'll go out and save them and try and protect them and find them. No. Instead, she goes off to visit Logain, who's trapped in a cave, and this cave is where we spend most of the episode, and by God, is it boring. Like, it literally contributes nothing until right at the end of the episode. But now she's gone offer to shield him, because that way she can sit in a cave and do nothing, while all of the people which literally the fate of the entire world relies on are just literally getting hunted by the Dark One. And while she could be out there looking for them, guarding them, protect them, she isn't, because she's in here doing nothing. Doing a job that literally anyone could do. And they do lie about the shields. They say it's so hard to hold a shield, which isn't true. It's like it's so much harder to hold a shield than be shielded, which isn't true. Like, it's hard to shield someone when they're actively channeling, because it's like sticking something into a river, the flow will force it. But they said they snuck into him and shielded him when he was asleep. So he wasn't channeling, so it was easy. And once that shield is in place, it's incredibly easy to maintain because there's no flow of the river. There's no power going there. All you've got to do is dam it. And he can't do anything about it because he can't reach the power. It's something that is literally so easy to do, and even someone much weaker than the person they're holding can hold a shield on them as long as that shield was done in place to begin with. But not here, because we're obsessed with completely changing the magic system, and this won't be the last time. Now they've also forgotten another basic trick, which is literally you can hand off your weaves to someone else. So if you're holding a shield, you can just give your shield to somebody else. But in this, they actually have to shield someone else first before the other people drop them, because otherwise he'll escape. Nor am I a fan of the effect of it this time. Well, the visuals are normally very good. In this, it just looks like a spider web bubble, and it's not what his shields were. The power comes from one source to you in a straight line, and the shield literally just cuts that and stops you being able to pull it down that line. It's not like, oh, well, you only shielded my head, so I'll draw it through my feet. That's not how any of this works. You don't need a bubble around somebody. Stop it. Then we get the warders going through their forms. There's some nice little tricks that Lan does in this, and I'm sure they're just cuts and he doesn't actually do them, but it looks like he does, and I like the kind of scene. They drop some exposition during this, and this is a way to give you something interesting to watch while it's happening. It's a shame they don't do that for the rest of the episode, because there's a lot of exposition dropped in here that doesn't really mean much, like slight hints about what each of the Ajars does, and that's really, for the 50 minutes in the middle, like some of the most impressive and interesting things that happen. If it feels like I'm going through this episode faster than normal, it's because I am. It's because there's not much to say. Then we're back with the Tinkers. Probably some of those boring people from the book, and it's well shown here, so at least this is realistic. And Perrin says he doesn't trust them. There's something off about them, and Egwene immediately goes, look, if you don't trust them, we'll leave, we'll go. And then they immediately follow them, even though they've literally just said they were going to go. Right. Rand and Matt are going through the forest with Thom, and they discuss what happens if Thom just killed the Dark Friend to get her on his side, and Matt's respectably impressed by this. I mean, he's supposed to be the really paranoid person at this point, and he's like, yeah, you know, I couldn't have thought of that one myself, but you did, and that's really paranoid. I like that. I'm impressed. But then he says that the Dark Friend reminded them that actually there was 5, and he goes through them. It's like the 3 boys, and then you've got Egwene, so who's the 5th? And it's kind of a, who is this person? Now, what can we guess who it is through the rest of the episode? Anyone that's read the books will know I don't like this, and you'll understand why. But spoilers, so I'm not going to go into that. Then we have Moraine discussing with other Aes Sedai exactly what can happen, and again, they drop some more hints about what the different Ajars do. You've got the green, which are the battle Ajars, and the blue, which are supposed to be about justice, which has always been a bit of a sort of a weird, ephemeral kind of, that could be anything description for an Ajar. Next, they're going to discuss what will happen if they've actually already gentled the Dragon Reborn, because Logain could be the Dragon Reborn, and they're about to gentle him, and you could literally be ending the world. You could be causing the apocalypse by doing this to the men because you have no idea who it is. It's a good question, and one that in the books Moraine actually posed herself, but now it's being repeated back to her to get her opinion of it. It's a good way to get around it, especially if you can't hear inside people's heads like you can in the books. And so I'm not against this. It's just one of the few interesting pieces of conversation that actually exists in an hour-long show. Next up, Liandrin and Nynaeve, and it actually has a thing that harks back to the first episode, because she says, look, I can't quite place your accent, and Nynaeve's like, that's because you haven't heard me speak. And this shows that she's grown from the first episode, because in the first one, Moraine actually uses a similar trick on her. She says, oh, you've only had that braid 1 year, that'll make you what, like 21? And she goes, no, I'm not 25, which allows her to place her age and then fit that into what Moraine knows about who the Dragon Reborn could be. And she learned from that because she learned that's what she did. And so now she's not falling for the same trick twice. And it's just a very common Aes Sedai thing that people are trying, and it's a little trick they do, and she knows not to fall for it this time. I do like that little subtle hint. It's just kind of dropped in here without being mentioned. But if they wrote that in deliberately, I think that's a strong point for sure. Now, the boys are confronted by a man with a bow, and Thom goes to handle him, and Rand's like, oh, no, stop it. I don't want you doing that, because he's seen how Thom handles people. Now, that's not how Thom handles people, but it seems to be how they insinuate he'd handle this. And again, this isn't his character, and Thom really isn't acting like Thom throughout any of this. None of it really makes much sense. Liandrin's putting in poison. You should know than to ask a question of a red and expect reasonable information. But here we are, and there's a bit more about what the different Ajars do, as before, and you can tell that she's sticking in poison to Nynaeve. She's trying to separate her away from Moiraine. And Lan seems to know that as well, because he comes up and just goes, oh, can I join you? And of course, she doesn't want to do that in the presence of Moiraine's own warder. And you can see, just by the expression on her face, a kind of annoyance at him coming to interrupt when she just thinks she's getting her way. I like the moment. It's just that in this, I'm cutting out the moments that I like. And there's a lot of boring stuff that literally had me halfway through looking at the time to see how much more was left. And if you want to make Moiraine look like a moron, this is how you do it. Because Nynaeve's like, yeah, why haven't we left yet? And Lan's like, no, we're going to Tar Valon. We're going all the way to Tar Valon, and then they have the resources to find the boys, and then we can leave Tar Valon and go and find them and protect them. That's if they haven't already got there. No one cares. Moiraine is sitting in a cave, weaving her shield, and Lan's out here drinking, and none of them care that the people which need to be protected, otherwise the apocalypse happens. That's all fine. Let those farm boys just wander around on their own. It'll be fine. It'll be okay. It's all perfect. What a moronic belief, and all of this comes from the problem that now they've had Moiraine injured, and she didn't give them the coins that she did at the start in the first episode. And the reason she couldn't give them those coins is because that was a form of the warder's bond and a form of compulsion. And you can't have compulsion because that removes consent. And removing consent from somebody in this day and age as a woman is something you can't possibly show. So because we couldn't do that and because we couldn't show that, now Moiraine hasn't planted trackers on the boys. And that means she has no idea where they are. And so she has to go to Tar Valon to find them. Meanwhile, they're getting chased by literal Satan and every spawn of darkness in the entire world, and they're unprotected, untrained, and Lan, even though he was with them, didn't provide them any fighting skills, even though that's literally his job. So Moiraine in this has screwed it up from start to finish and everything in the middle. And even though now she's awake, and as she said, I've now got enough energy to shield that guy, so she's definitely got enough energy to leave and look for the people who are responsible for saving the world. No, now they don't care, and they're just going to sit around and wait for as long as is required. Of all the examples of pathetically bad storytelling, I think this one definitely comes at the top. I didn't think they'd want to actively humiliate Moiraine, but in this scene they've done it, and I don't think they've even realized they have. Back with the Tinkers, and admittedly, this is probably one of the most realistic parts of the show that they've actually nailed in the books, because the Tinkers are as boring as ever. They start telling about the Way of the Leaf and sort of their lives and everything, and literally their entire story is that nothing ever happens to them. These are people who are pacifists. They won't fight back, even if you try and kill them. They'll try and escape, or just let you do it. It should be common sense that a group of people who literally their entire belief system is that they will never do anything probably won't be the most interesting to watch. And so they're incredibly boring and dull. The scenes in the book with them are incredibly boring and dull. And that's what these were. There was one saving grace in the books, though, and that was Elyas and him talking to Perrin. And in this, because they've cut Elyas, they've cut the only interesting part of these scenes. And that was a big mistake, and this is why you don't go and mess with things, because you think you're improving it, when really, you're removing the best bits and just making everything worse. Rand and Matt are mucking out a stable. That's as interesting as it sounds. But Matt leaves, and he starts to vomit up like this gunk, and it's literally sort of the evil, the filth, the taint coming out of him, and it starts to affect the ground, the very ground it touches, and then kind of dies because it's out in the real world and not in Shadar Logoth. You kind of see it on his mouth before it goes back inside of him because it's not ready yet. I think this is a great visual representation of what the dagger is doing to him, what Shadar Logoth is doing to him. And it was quite a complex thing to actually describe in the books, but they're doing a good job of just showing that visually here. Again, the visuals are one of the strong points of the show, the writing, one of the weak points. And we see that right next. Because he just meets a child and waffles on about nothing for a while. And I think this is done to try and show you that even though the taint is inside him, it's not taking over him yet because he's not doing anything to this child. It's kind of meant to contrast it, it just drags on too long, and it's filler, and there are far more interesting things, stuff of the actual plot you could be doing right now, like showing us more of Thom, because you already cut loads of his story out already, and you'd think you'd be making up for that in this episode. And to be fair, they try in this scene, where Tom's talking to Rand, and he's like, look, I think Matt can channel. There's something weird about him. He's not acting right, and I've already got experience this. And this is Thom, at least. Like, he would notice things, pick up on small hints that Rand wouldn't, and put two and two together and come to a conclusion. It's just the rest of the character of how we've seen of him. That's not Thom at all, but at least the kind of the noticing details part, they've nailed. The issue is, he also tells him about Owen, and he's like, well, I know this because of Owen. The issue with Owen is that that's like his most personal story of all time, and he's barely known these kids. He's known them for like 2 minutes. He wouldn't tell them about it at all. In the books, he does tell them something, but he doesn't tell them all the details, because it's private. Apart from mentioning his name, that's about all they get, whereas in this, they get all of the gory details about how he was a man who could channel, and the Aes Sedai came, and they gentled him, and after that, they killed himself. And it really does at least show the effects of gentling, and that literally it's a death sentence, because although the Aes Sedai may not be killing you, to lose your access to the One Power, that is the inevitable thing that happens anyway. But all of this is so personal, and it's sold just so quickly, in scenes where he's barely been in the entire series at all. This could have made sense if he'd been in from the start of the show, and he'd got to know them and wanted to protect them. But now it's just all so fast and so quick, and it just comes across as a really poor addition. They've gone too far, too fast, far faster than it was even in the books. And in the books, he's been along for this entire journey, and it's still, even at that point, too private for him just to tell them. Whereas in this, no problem, I'll just tell you all my deepest, darkest secrets, and that's fine. Next up, they ask how Nynaeve and Lan met, and she's like, oh, I tracked him, and they're like, oh yeah, I like this one. And at no point does Lan go, she tracked me, and then she tried to stab me in the neck, brutally murder me in cold blood for absolutely no reason. Then she threatened to murder my Aes Sedai and not heal it even though she was dying, all for absolutely no reason, even though she's a medic. He couldn't use that comeback, even though that would be totally justified and literally the attitude that Lan should have at this point. Nynaeve has been nothing but a complete bint and is probably the most single dislikable character in the entire show so far, which is nothing like how a character is meant to be. But I don't think the writers can actually write social interaction, and so they think that she's been, like, strong or something, and she hasn't. That's not how a woman acts strong. No. But then we see the Green Ajah, the ones who are the Battle Ajah, but also have many warders for the fighting, and also to take to their bed. Yes, some of the Aes Sedai do sleep with their warders, and Nynaeve doesn't like this, and she begins to think, what exactly is going on between Moiraine and Lan then, if that's the responsibility there? Because the Greens are having a threesome, and who knows what anyone else is up to. All this is definitely part of the story, and this is one of the reasons why Wheel of Time doesn't need to be changed. Because if you wanted to send a message about something, it's already in the books, and it's told far superior than anything that Raph could possibly create. So he just left everything alone, because what he wanted is already here. But then they're discussing Logain, and this is where it gets weird, because again, they're changing the magic system. Because Moiraine's like, I don't know if he's the Dragon Reborn, what happens if we accidentally gentle him? And Lan's like, is he as strong as Egwene? And Moiraine goes, I don't think so. I'm not sure, but I don't think so. When the answer should be, yes, he's far stronger than Egwene. Far, far stronger by an order of magnitude. He's basically stronger than every Aes Sedai I've ever met. Should be the answer to that question, and it's not. And there definitely seem to be rebalancing the power levels between men and women. Because the Wheel of Time actually has a rather unfortunate for Raph reality that men are vastly stronger in the power than women. And I mean vastly. Like, the graph in the strength of the power would be similar to if you made a graph of weightlifting between men and women. It's like, yeah, you'll have some women that have some overlap with the bottom of the scale of the men, but by and large, they're just stronger. That's just a reality of what it is, but they seem to be changing that here by going that he's not even stronger than Egwene, and Egwene might be strong for a woman, but she's not for a man at all. And then they go and talk about Rand, and it's like, well, they're out in the danger, they're out alone, and I'm like screaming, yes, you should be leaving, but instead you're sitting on your bed talking about it, and most of the day you've spent sitting in a cave. And, like, you understand that these are untrained farm boys out in the dangerous wild, and if they die, the world ends. But you're still just sitting there doing nothing. You should be doing something. But that's not what they're bothered about. No, instead, she's like, we've spent 20 years looking for them, and we lost them. And Lan's like, I lost them. And I'm like, what? Why are we blaming the man again? Lan, it wasn't your fault. Firstly, you had no choice. You were going to die if you didn't leave, and the shadow had already essentially cut you off. And in the books, it was Moraine's fault, and Moraine made all of those decisions that Lan's made in this, and she didn't care about it, and she didn't have to go around saying, oh my god, it was my fault, I made so many mistakes. And yet here we are, we've got to keep blaming Lan for it, even though Moraine's the one to blame. It's a bit odd, and I don't know why we rewrote it, just so we had to do that, but here we are. Back to the boredom, and Egwene is flirting with Aram, staring lovingly into his eyes, stargazing under an open night sky. Or dancing with him. Because you know what? None of this carries any weight of this anymore. None of this matters. In the books, her and Rand were still promised together. There was still a will they won't they relationship going on. So this was essentially almost like emotional cheating, and you actually had him doing similar things. It was like, oh, well, they're both probably kind of in the wrong here. But in this, you've aged them up for absolutely no reason apart from trying to make some kind of shipping relationships. And in the first episode, you already had them together. And then in the first episode, she also dumped him. So now she's single. So this carries no weight whatsoever. Nobody cares about this. It's just a single woman dancing with a guy. And that makes it boring. Like, there's no weight to this, there's no impact to this, there's no, oh, Randall be pissed moment about this. Literally, it's completely irrelevant and pointless, and it's just contributing to the entire boredom of everything the Tinkers provide. Then there's just more waffle about how they don't attack anyone, and if they do attack, and if someone attacks them, then they just roll over and die, and it's really not that interesting, and it's trying to set up the whole Perrin falling out with his axe thing, except in this, Perrin doesn't even have his axe, and I'm not even sure they're actually going to include the one moment that actually starts it all off, because instead, it's looking like they replaced that with him just randomly murdering his wife. And which completely ruins him as an entire character, but it's not like the show cares, and so I don't really care about this, because it was far better when he was actually struggling with his own choices about what he knew he was capable of, and now he's just like, oh, I murdered my wife, I really don't like violence anymore. It's such a boring plot line, done by boring people in a boring situation, and it just drags on forever. Rand now thinks that Matt can channel the one power, and he's like, look mate, whatever happens, just know I'll be with you. And then he goes to sleep, and he enters one of the dream sequences. Now, I really like Perrin's dream sequence. I thought they nailed it, even though it was hard to do. But in this one, I don't think it lands. I don't know what it's meant to be. And it doesn't really nail the element of the dream sequences, which is meant to be almost like nighttime torture. None of this really gives that kind of impact to it at all. And the best bit about it was the flaming man's face, which was a strong point before. Again, visual department on point. Everyone else, meh. But he's woken up by Thom, and he realizes Matt's gone. And this is where I think they begin to play a trick on people, because I think they make other people think, okay, you know we've destroyed the book so far, we're going to do it again. And then they use that as the twist, because they find Matt in a house surrounded by corpses. And you get this beautiful image where he's clearly being taken over by the dagger. This guy is not in control of himself anymore. It's like literally just pouring out of his mouth. And you think that the family is actually been killed by Matt. And in this, I'm like, oh no. Oh, you haven't destroyed this character as well, have you? And it turns out, no, they haven't. And that was kind of the twist. And I don't know whether it was done deliberately or just to try and mislead people that way. But either way, it was a nice twist in a situation that wasn't there, but I think it plays on the fact that, yeah, we can do anything, we're willing to do anything, even destroy our characters, and you'll never be sure exactly what's going on. And honestly, I think you should just stick to the original story because it's better. But he's like, I see you, and he points the dagger. I don't know why the dagger would hunt down a Fade. Doesn't make much sense, especially as Matt would get slaughtered by a Fade. But this is where Thom springs into action, and it's one of the moments, it's been replaced in scenes, but it's actually very well done, because Thom immediately springs into action to save the boys. He starts by yeeting a dagger straight at the Fade's face and pushes the boys towards the door so that they can escape while he stays and fights. He sacrifices himself for them, just like it happens in the first books. And although they've moved the situation, I do think this has been a well done and a good recreation of it, which is good because I think the rest of the time what they've done to Thom is horrific. but at least they gave him a good send-off. You get to see both Thom's fighting prowess, as well as the fact that the Fades are incredibly powerful as well, including the time that Thom actually just yeets a dagger at them and they catch it in midair. It's like, yeah, you can understand how he's going to die when they're literally just pulling daggers out of thin air. It's very difficult to beat that, even though Thom's skill is incredible. It's not looking good for him here. But the boys panic and leg it as they would because they're untrained farm boys, and really, they need other people to protect them. They were lucky they found Thom, but Moraine should be here. She should care about this. She should be looking for them because she should be the one that should protect them. And, yeah, she's still sitting in a cave. Now we have Liandrin discussing with the other Green Azure Aes Sedai that actually we could just let the shield go. We could let the shield go and he could try and escape. And then when he tries to escape, the three oaths will allow us to actually kill him because now he'll be a danger to us. And it kind of implies that she's done this before, and the Red Azure has done this before, and this has always been her plan. It's messy. It's against Tarvaelan law, but never exactly stop the Aes Sedai from doing anything else, so it makes a lot of sense. What doesn't make sense is this scene where Nynaeve actually just stumbles across Lan and he just tells her. He's like, oh yeah, I'm just praying for the 7 Towers of Malkia. Yeah, of course I am. I mean, in the books, he never tells her this. It was actually Moraine which comes out and explains that kind of backstory because that is incredibly personal to him. And it's not something he just shares with anybody at all, especially someone that tried to murder him for no reason, has been nothing but a complete bint to him the entire series. This is someone he has no reason to trust, no reason to even like. And yet here he is, just opening his entire heart to her, randomly, for no reason, even though she actually threatened his Aes Sedai, threatened to murder her, tried to murder him, was a medic, didn't want to render medical aid even though someone was injured. And this is how you act like the worst person possible to exist, and somehow because you're a woman, everyone else still likes you. It doesn't make any sense in the plot, and I don't know what the writers are doing. I don't know why they're crucifying Nynaeve like this, and if they think that this is how you write a strong character, you're wrong. If other people like her, you've got to give them reasons to like her, and there's none here. This is now twice in one episode they've done this. Thom gave away information of his most private and personal story, and now Lan has as well, and it didn't make sense for either of them. But even that makes more sense than what we're witnessing here, which is Nynaeve actually praying down and speaking the old tongue, which say something that the last king of Manetheren said to his wife. Which doesn't make any sense, because also in the first episode, Moraine actually said that isn't even from the Two Rivers, which is Manetheren. She was brought in afterwards. And they gave her that story, which wasn't her backstory, but that's the story they've added. And now they're also skipping that. And I don't know whether this just doesn't make sense now and they're going to try and explain it later, but they better do, because so far what we've got is some weird contradiction of someone that's not even from the Two Rivers using the old tongue to describe something which is specific to the Two Rivers, which even people in the Two Rivers don't know. And this is basically ripped from Matt from the books. Matt was the one speaking the old tongue. Matt was the person who got that through sort of the old blood. It was passed down sort of as genetic memory that was rising to the surface. And in this, there's no reason for her to, because she's not even from the same area. So we've taken that from Matt, and now we've given it to Nynaeve, just so she can actually have something to do in the series. It's bizarre. I hope there's more to this, because there needs to be more to this. Otherwise, this is just a massive contradiction that doesn't make any sense. We get to the strong ending, where Logain's forces have actually found the camp and they are trying to free him. And this is where we get to see everyone come into their own. We get the Battle Azure slaughtering all the people that are attacking them, and they get to show off their skills. The warders get to show off their skills. And by and large, it's really strong. There's one scene where it's all done in slow motion, and you can clearly see one of the warders pull back multiple arrows, and then they don't fire. Normally, I'd let that kind of stuff go. I don't really care so much. But in this, it's done in slow motion, right in the center of the footage, and he's the only thing to look at, and it just probably should have been cut. But overall, I like the battle, and I like what happens next even more. You see, Logain uses the distraction to break out of the shield, and then he melts his entire cage like this in a pretty cool way. And obviously, as he breaks through the shield, there's like a back blast that blasts all of the Aes Sedai to the ground, and so it's just between Logain and Moraine. And Moraine comes in and discusses with him. I don't really want to gentle the dragon, because if I do, the apocalypse will happen. So can you prove to me that it is? And he goes, look, yeah, I hear the voices of my ancestors. They speak to me when I channel, which would be the dark faces behind him. But it turns out that Moiraine's just waiting for time. She didn't believe he was the dragon at all. Now, this harks back to earlier where the Dark Friend said there was 5, so you meant to think that Logain could have been the 5th. But Moiraine in this says he definitely isn't, and she's actually just stalling for time for the Aes Sedai to recover so they can shield him again. But as they shield him, he fires out 3 darts at them, and obviously the Battlejar, she realizes this, and she actually goes to shield the other 2 women and not herself. Why all of them can't actually shield themselves, I don't know. You'd think the Redajar would be very used to fighting male channelers at this point, and she could shield herself, but apparently no, and this leads to the Green's death. She sacrifices herself to save the other 2. The issue is that he's her warder, and when an Aes Sedai dies, the warders actually lose complete control. They don't kill themselves, like if you cut off from the source, but they do basically lose all self-control, and they not only seek revenge, but they will put themselves in any dangerous situation in order to seek death. They take insane risks, and that is not explained here, but that is the reason for this guy's next action. Because as he enters the cave, he now realizes that this is his chance, and even though this is a very, very stupid idea, he does it anyway, even though Lan is screaming, "No, don't do it!" Obviously, from the trailer, this is him yeeting himself across the floor, about to bury his axes in Logain's head, but it doesn't actually go to plan, and this is something he never should have done, and would never have done if he'd been in control of himself, but as his Aes Sedai has died, he isn't. Logain stops the axes with his own power, and explodes them, shatters them, saying shards of sharpened metal across the floor, and everyone except Nynaeve is knocked to the ground, slit, or in serious trouble, especially Lan. Yeah, Lan actually has his throat cut, and Nynaeve rushes to his side, realizing that there's nothing she can do about this. Lan's a goner. Or at least he should be, unless she explodes like a bonfire and heals everyone in the room. The weird thing at this point is she's screaming like, "No!" And she's just like her power erupts and everything else. Firstly, you're meant to think that she really cares about Lan and she just doesn't want him to die so much, which made sense in the books because they'd built it up. But in this, she's trying to murder him in cold blood for absolutely no reason in one episode, to now she's like the love of her life or something, and she's erupting in power, becoming the wilder that she always was, showing her power, showing that she literally burns like a bonfire compared to Egwene, who's more like a candle. But there's no reason for it. She's acting like a bint the entire 2 episodes, and literally it's not like it's shown in return. In the books, this actually built all the way through, but also in the books, she didn't act like such a horrible prat as she had in this. They've done Nynaeve a really, really bad disservice throughout this entire show, really, just in the way she's acting, and I can only think that they've done it because they think this is how, strong women act, and it just doesn't work at all. That kind of behavior doesn't wash at all, and for it to end in this is bizarre. Also, it's standard in the One Power, in the normal magic system anyway, but they've probably changed that, that women can sense other women that can channel, and they can also naturally sense their power. So all along, since Nynaeve and Moiraine have been together, Moiraine should have been able to feel her power, and so should Liandrin, and everyone else in the camp. And given that she is so strong, given that she's more powerful than most of the Aes Sedai there, if not all of them, they should have been basically in awe. They should have felt her power and been amazed. And yet apparently until this moment, no one knew she could channel. But it gets worse. You see, Logain is so amazed by her power and just how strong she is that he doesn't do anything. And he just stands there, and while he could escape, he decides not to, because he's just stunned by her, how amazing she is. Now, it doesn't really make much sense, because Logain is way stronger than Nynaeve, as are most of the strongest men. Nynaeve just isn't even there. He's multiple scales above her. He is actually above the entire women's scale. Because men have their own, because they have to go a lot higher up. But apparently in this, he may not even be as strong as Egwene, let alone anywhere close to Nynaeve. They've completely changed it, because now this is the Wheel of Time, where equality is important to something. But in this, no, Logain, who's really strong in the power, is now less than Egwene, who's nowhere near to Nynaeve. That makes a lot of sense. And as I've said before, when you change something like this, I don't care why you do it. I don't care if you think you're fixing it. for modern moral values. The issue is that later on, you won't be able to remember what you've changed, and you will have more problems, as we've already seen in the 4 episodes. Every change they've made has made problem after problem after problem, and this is just another one. As is the fact that none of the women that were around Nynaeve knew she could channel, even though by definition they must have done. But immediately after that, after his shock at just how amazing Nynaeve was, he doesn't do anything, and they all link together, and it's controlled by Liandrin. Now, when you're in a thing like this, it's not explained, but they actually sacrifice all of their control, and it's just the power flowing through them into the person, Liandrin, who's controlling it. And so she gentles him, which is what she actually said she wanted all along when she got her wish. But if someone else had actually controlled this circle, then they might have just shielded him and not done it. But because Liandrin was in control, she got to choose, and now she's got her reason why. Of course, this leads to the inevitable scene of emasculation, as you just see Logain weeping on the floor. But don't worry, because you've got the strong woman as the ending scene. She's like, yeah, now I realize how powerful I am. You better all watch out, because this woman's in charge. It's like, oh, really? Do we have to go there? We've made so many contradictions. We've got Logain just being a weakling of his former self, all for this shot. And is that really what anyone asked for? By far, I think this was probably the worst episode. I think it started very strong, and I think it ended very strong. But in the middle, I was bored just looking at the time. And when we add in the rest and all the changes, and how we've literally completely changed the one power, that really takes a knock on it, and it's just, no. I don't want equality Wheel of Time version. I want everybody to be at the strengths that they actually were, and this isn't like up for debate. We know where everyone is in the one power, we know their rankings, and there is an objective system that they could have used to get everyone in all of the strengths of the power that they should have been. And they haven't. In fact, they've directly contradicted it already. Add on to this the fact that Moraine isn't even acting like Moraine anymore. Oh, we're just going to go to the tower and we don't care that the boys are out on their own. No, I mean, they are literally responsible for the apocalypse, and we should probably protect them from the Dark One, Satan himself. But no, I don't really know if we care about that. We should just sit in a cave for a while. Yeah, we'll sit in a bed and bitch, and then we'll go off to Tar Valon at the end of it. It doesn't make sense. It's not her character. She's not lazy, but that's how it comes across. Lazy and stupid. And I'm very surprised they've done that to Moraine, because Moraine, even if she was tired, even if she was exhausted, which it specifically says she wasn't, then she still would have got on her horse and immediately gone looking for them. But because they didn't want to give them the coins, because they didn't want to come up with that, oh, well, this is actually a form of bonding, which adds in compulsion, which takes away the boys' consent. And, well, now they don't have their coins, which means she's got no way to track them, which means she has to go to Tar Valon. So if anyone wants to go, well, she just doesn't know where they were. Yes, but she should do, but that was removed. And this is what I mean. When you go and change the story, you make one change that you think is a minor change in episode 1, and by episode 4, now you've got your main characters sitting around as the world literally comes to its end. So there's so many bad changes in this, but even without that, there was a lot of those in the earlier episodes as well. The reason why I think this is awful is the middle sections. I know the Tinkers were boring in the books, but Elyas made them interesting. He could have spoken to Perrin, but you've cut him as well. So now we're just left with the boring people that the Tinkers are. Even the Aram Egwene storyline, you've removed all kind of impact from that, because now Egwene's just a single woman, and so that has no impact at all. So while there were some scenes that I liked, overall they made some terrible changes, and they just added in a load of stuff that really shouldn't have been there and added nothing. And it comes a bit like they just did it to save money. Like they spent all of their money on the first scene and the last scene, and so in the middle, they just had to sit in a forest and waffle for a long time. It felt like a filler episode, and I have no reason to think it wasn't. It was a filler episode that did a lot of damage to the series and its own plot, but a filler episode nonetheless. So for me, I think this has definitely got to be my least favorite episode so far, even though there were some scenes that I thought were really well done. For the other episodes, I wasn't sure if I just didn't like them because they didn't stick to the books, but maybe somebody watching it who hadn't read the books may have thought those were good. But in this, I think this is just objectively a slow, dull, boring episode, which, whether you've read the books or not, you'll probably find a drag. But for now, that's it from me. If you like the video, press like and subscribe. More videos like this in the future. And I'll see you in the next one. Let me know what you thought of the episode down below. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.